looks like we're at number 300 in the videos. Good thing painting's a marathon. You would hate to have to look up the hill to watch 300 of these if that was your inclination. Or maybe you'd just love every minute. That would be nice. We have a question today about weaves of canvases, the roughness of canvas, texture, whatever. And from a gentleman named Malachi. But before we do, I just want to thank Benjamin C. for your regular contribution. Thank you so much, Benjamin. And you come in right for number 300, a real landmark. 300 of these, I wouldn't have believed it just a couple minutes ago, so to speak. Malachi wants to talk about texture, so let's just read this through. I'm going to probably read the whole thing to you. My producer will decide how much of this you're going to see at a given time and how much he wants to show my face. But I'm going to show it full screen, so it'll be your decision, Mr. Producer. And speaking of Mr. Producer, I'm sure he wants me to mention that we have another live stream coming up, which is a continuing conversation about the demonstration you'll be watching on that live stream. And I also want to make sure I invite you all to consider going to the intensive that we do for 6 weeks starting June 20th this year. And look around for information about that, or ask me for it if you don't have any. And I would look forward to seeing you all. The intensive is really, it's organized around trying to get people who have a bit of confidence in their drawing. They just want to understand a whole new way of thinking, a whole different way of thinking of the purely visual, appearances-based thinking. And methodology associated commonly with the Boston School, the way I found it. So let's jump on that. What kind of canvas did painters like Gilbert Stuart and David paint on? When I look at old paintings, and of course Gilbert Stuart was the guy I talk about as having been my first influence. Of course, was a photograph up on the wall in my little school when I was a 5-year-old first grader. So what kind of canvas did painters like Gilbert Stuart and David paint on? When I look at old paintings, the canvas always appears like a rough, strongly textured material, far different from the kind of stuff I find at art stores. There's 2 points there before we go further into this. Don't trust the appearances of a photograph. Go to the museum and go for it with no purpose in mind except to spend 20 minutes looking at as many different canvases as you can that show their texture. The early canvases were wood, frequently. The early surfaces were wood early, way back when, and they've gone through every range of texture since then. If I remember correctly, I was looking at a Tiepolo in the Metropolitan Museum and finding it to have an astoundingly thick canvas. And it really made sense when you consider how far away the painting was going to be seen from and various other aspects of painting. But texture is kind of a big deal. I'll talk about other aspects of that in a minute. But I find that I need to tactilely feel the paint coming off the brush. So you can use soft brushes. You can probably get used to it too, but soft brushes and smooth canvases are a different category of what I prefer. And we'll talk about all those different things, but they come all over the place. You look at Holbein, for example, and so many of those early ones you just can't picture. The early Dutch, German, the northern ones. All that stuff looks like it's really smooth. Look at those things. See what they're making them out of. I know the old masters commonly used linen canvas. Now, I don't know about the old masters. That's a big word, covering a lot of territory. But canvas isn't unusual, and linen is definitely the go-to from way back. Again, that could very well be the Dutch. A lot of the good linen still comes from over in that part of the world. But it doesn't look like the type of linen I bought at local art stores. You have to be in a pretty good-sized store, but I would suggest you actually go online, and a lot of these guys will send you samples, little sort of booklet of all the sizes all the different textures they sell. And you should give it a shot. See if they'll send you that, so that you can make your own decision with the thing in their hand, in your hand, with the actual canvases in your hand. The ones, and you're saying local art shows, which seem much thinner and with a less pronounced texture. Now, canvas thinness is one thing. The texture is obviously, if you make your canvas out of a big fat rope, you're going to wind up with a much thicker canvas. But they're very fine. They're very fine canvases. Some of these companies refer to them. I think of Clausen. Clausen is the company I like best. And I think of Clausen's, I think they have what they call a portrait grade or something, a grain. And it's a really quite fine canvas. And if it's double primed, you might not even be able to see the texture on it. But it does go all the way up. I'll talk about some of those in a minute. I recently ordered a large piece of herringbone weave material to experiment on after sizing and stretching it on a wooden frame. I found it an enjoyable surface to paint on, but the herringbone weave stands out so much I wasn't pleased with the results. Yeah, I made that mistake myself, and I'll show you one. It isn't egregious, but it's one of those things where you might have done well to paint on a smoother canvas when they didn't show the texture so much. I'll talk about why I do what I do. And I suspect I did something wrong. Have you ever painted on this kind of material? And if you have, what's the best way to prepare it? Now, I don't prepare materials anymore. I haven't prepared my own materials in 40 years at least. So I don't pretend to know. I found that just getting a good quality canvas pre-primed, I found that I couldn't do it as well as they could, and I didn't want to spend my life sorting that out. There was way too much information I was trying to get that had to do with the skill itself, and I wanted to minimize as much as I could the other problems and not get myself into all sorts of things like the materials and methods guys do. So the simplest way is the best way. That sort of Paxton thing appealed to me enormously. That sounds like if you heard that meowing, that was my cat trying to get out. And fortunately for him, he was just allowed out. So let's look at some pictures. I'll do this pretty quickly, I think. In my studio is a copy of a copy of this painting by Alice Ruggles, and whose married name is Alice Ruggles Sohier, as I understand it. And I'm showing you a close-up of that canvas. The canvas is, this photograph is just the Vermeer, and I can't tell you, I don't recall any Vermeers being painted on rough canvas. They don't look like they likely were, just from photographs you see now, but I honestly don't recall having observed the canvas in any way. And in fact, a big part of the way I think about canvas is it really doesn't want to become something so significant that when a viewer looks at the canvas, he sees the canvas instead of your picture. Why would you want that? And I think you'll find that most painters are pretty much in that way of thinking. On the other hand, there are certain things that textured canvases can do, and some of the tonalists, like John White Alexander, they take advantage of some of those things, like soft edges with a stroke, but you can see the canvas close up with a sheen on it there, with a glare on it there. You can look at that and you can see that that's canvas. That canvas is a little rougher than what I use. By the way, what I use typically is a number 12 Clausen's, a number 12 single primed. And I'm finding, as I look at the back of these just today, I'm finding that most of these guys use something similar, and I wasn't instructed to do that. I worked through the process. I used a lot of the even canvases of some of the big names, and I didn't like them, the ones that were too mechanically even. Clausen's has a wonderful bit of knottiness and stuff like that. And I find that there are various things about its irregularities that made it much more appealing for this form. But you can see that this has been pretty heavily painted, and it's also, by the way, in bad shape. But you can probably get some idea of the type of texture it had. it's fairly similar to that. I wish I could hold it in my hand. I have a photograph of that in a minute, but and thank you, George, for allowing me to have that in my studio for a while, um, um, and, um, and share it with my students. Um, by the way, George is the guy responsible for uh, getting the GBA time lapse thing done along with my son, so that you get to watch online this high speed version of the painting that I do of the violinist. Now here's a Tarbell, and you can see the texture there. If you see the size of that canvas, it's probably a life-size head. It's a self-portrait of Tarbell. But if you look at that, you'll see that that grain is actually a little bit rougher, but you can still see it's in a range uh, that's still relatively smooth. And if you look down further into the painting, when you get down to the set of ridges, like right here, you can see by the time he's painted it 2 or 3 times, he's starting to lose most of the grain completely. And that's one of those things that I like in my canvas, is that I typically paint in something like in the direction of 3 skins. And I like to have the canvas starting to become less visible by that at that point, and it does nicely. On the other hand, I like a single prime canvas because I like the feel of the tooth in the brush, especially in those first several lay-ins. Of course, it makes your work a little bit more difficult because you got to fill the interstices of the canvas so it doesn't, you don't have white spots showing up in between. And here's one that also is in the studio, and this thanks to Rick Dickinson, who's been a student of mine for a while, and he found this one online, this DeCamp, fairly recently. But this one, I'm showing you the back here. You can see a close-up of this. You can feel that weave. You're going to have to stick your eyeballs in it. But if you look closely at this, you're going to see that his weave here is very similar to what you'll find in a Clausen 12 SP. It's just a great weave to paint on if you're going to do several layers. It comes off your brush so that you can feel the paint, which is, to me, a significant thing in terms of the painterliness. As I said, not that you can't get that with a smooth brush on a smooth surface as well. And then here's one by me, and this is where, if you look closely at this one here, you can see that the texture in various places, right through the middle here especially, you can see this rather atrocious texture. Now, this is just a canvas board. It was an expensive canvas board. I can't remember what company did it, but made it, I mean. But I really liked the board, but I found it both too regular, and I found I don't paint with thick paint. I use just the right amount of paint, as I like to think of it. So I'm not painting globby stuff piling up. If you're doing piling up, you may want to use a thicker canvas just to start with, I mean. But or if you're trying to just completely eliminate it. But I want the toothiness because I want it to hold the paint. I don't want it to be slipping or sliding over time. And mostly paint will not move much anyway, but I like the tooth for that reason, to be able to, for the first layers of paint, to be able to grab it, and the next layers even to grab that. One of the things we do, by the way, if you've never heard me say this before, is we weave brush strokes with a light. So if you're using a bristle brush and use a light touch, you try to recreate a surface so that you can paint on it over and over. You don't want to slick up your surface. But the value of the weave, the weave gets you that at the beginning. You feel that texture, and it has toothiness so that the paint bites on, has something to hang on to. And I think that way about the next layers too. So even though I paint fairly thinly, I'm still trying to make sure I paint with an edge drawn lightly so that it actually lifts tooth. Now that's an example of my canvas. That's the 12 single prime canvas. It's very hard to tell how much of a weave that is, but that's again where you want to go, is look online or something like that. But the 12 single prime Clausen, slightly on the grayish side compared to the yellower one that we showed you a second ago by DeCamp. That one there, slightly yellower. But that's the weave that I prefer for myself. And I just have found that most people in the world around the Boston School are working with this sort of a range, not a little rougher sometimes, a little smoother sometimes, but mostly in this sort of a range of texture. And as I said, I find it provides me the painterliness that I really want without becoming it it's not. I want to be able to feel the paint, and yet I don't want the texture to be visible as much as this one is. By the way, I never care. I always thought it was amusing on this one here, but the purchaser actually only made one comment about it, having liked it, but their only comment was they were rather, it wasn't quite as textured a surface, as showy a texture. So I don't blame them. Yeah. Now this was one of the paintings that you can observe at the Hispanic Society in New York, and it has a visible weave, but it's a fairly fine one. In his paint, one of the things notable about this painting at the Hispanic Society is how thinly painted it is. I mean, I think it's his painting that it looks like he's accomplished his mission in fewer layers than almost anybody I've ever seen. It looks efficient. And you get some sense maybe of that if you take a closer look down there at the color. I'm not sure you can really see it there, but you can see. Typically, by the way, if you go to the museum, you can see the texture of you can find the canvas somewhere in there where it's painted slightly more thinly, and you can actually make out the texture. But you really do need to see this in person to appreciate it. I mean, those things you need to see texture in person. Don't try to guess online. First of all, you have to know what size the painting is. It makes it more easy, makes it easier for you to guess what the texture is going to be online. I mean, canvas weaves they're literally counts. How many weaves per inch or whatever they use, and so it's definitely something you could calculate. If you knew the size of the painting, you'd be able to figure out what size the number of threads and all that stuff. So you could figure out which one it was like of the things you have around you. Now, I copied this Bouguereau, as I mentioned before, and that is about as smooth a surface as I have ever worked on. That also actually was a canvas. This was not a board, and my impression is that that the work of Bouguereau was done on. And believe me, I'm not the expert, but the stuff I've seen and been able to get my eyes close to. In this case, I had it in my hands and held the painting. It was in the restorer's possession, and I worked there with him, copying directly. And so I know that this is a canvas, et cetera, et cetera. But the smoothness then is rather fairly typical of also, though, people like Gerome. And Jerome's painting figures that are very small. I mean, frequently, 8, 10, 12 inches high, and even smaller. And so you understand that the rougher that texture gets, one little funny bump, and you're going to be destroying an entire piece of form. You'll be deforming some piece of anatomy somewhere. It can look pretty goofy. So these are very smooth canvases. I don't have any idea whether this is actually board or not, but I think I didn't. The one I've seen, which I didn't have to give you today, in person, was a canvas, and it was similarly fine with this. It wasn't so slicked up that it was that one wasn't so slicked up that it was like a hard board surface. But here's Ang, speaking of boards, and I'll introduce you to something very interesting. When I was a student of Gammell, this one looks like it was on paper. It looks like there's a paper edge. It looks like this is paper stuck to a board. And it's interesting, when I was working with Gammell, that we painted, under Gammell's advice, we painted on paper. You could stick it to something, or you could just pin it to something. I mean, just stick it on any way you wanted to, or you could actually adhere it. But the paper was shellac paper, and shellac paper was great. Now, first of all, for you guys who like tone, if you shellac it, you'll get a tone rather like this, if you use the light shellac. There are darker shellacks where you can get tones that are considerably darker, maybe more like this area. But whatever's fun. There are some very seriously dark shellacks, but I'm not recommending any of that stuff for the toning reasons, but I'm just mentioning that when you tone a piece of, and what we did was we used the Ang charcoal papers because we had them around, and typically they would have dings in them or something like that, little blips from finger dents, and we would shellac the paper, often both sides, and then just paint right on that surface. We've also done it with varnishing papers and stuff, but shellac just soaks right in, and it dries really fast. It's a really nice way to go. But Ang, and there's evidence of a lot of different people working on papers of various kinds, and I think Ang may have even worked on tracing paper at times. So all this stuff is rather interesting if you haven't thought of it before. You can get any smoothness you want in the paper family by using shellac paper and sticking it onto a hard surface, or sticking it onto a hard surface with the shellac, or there's all kinds of things. There's so many different dodges, but have some fun with that if you're inclined. A good place to try smooth surface without spending a ton of money. And typically this is what Gammell did. Now the picture above, I think that's probably the final version, but I saw that picture on paper. That was roughly the size of if I remember right, of a 19 by 25 sheet of shellacked paper. And there's no reason to believe anything that he was picking a size for that reason at all with any of these. This one, I think you can see possibly more that it could very likely have been that paper, but he just typically did that. He painted on paper, and it would be stuck to a board. And my guess is it was stuck to a board first. So maybe he picked that up from Ang or some others. But Gammell again was trying to use the modeling, softer brushes and all that stuff for these studies. Yeah. You can also see that smooth surface in Rubens and others. But that's so, we come by that sort of paper stuff, honestly. And I'll end with these couple. I did a copy of this painting by John White Alexander. Actually, for fun, I have the preliminary study is a little dried in, but the preliminary study for it is right here, so I can get it to a place where you can actually see it. So not too glary. So you can see that I did a copy of this thing, and but I mean this is the preliminary study, and what I found was on this study here this was the texture of this thing was not too dissimilar from the painting, but when I tried to do the painting, I found that I couldn't find a canvas rough enough. It was like burlap, and I couldn't find one rough enough. I went to all the canvas companies. I finally found the roughest version of, I don't know if it's Rublev, one of the Russian companies that sells canvas. And I took that roughest one, and it was nowhere near as rough as this John White Alexander painting. A better idea, which you probably can get by looking at this painting. And by the way, that John White Alexander, this one here, that painting is 60 inches high, if I remember right. So it's a very tall painting. And the roughness of the canvas would have, as I said, it would have made it more like a canvas board rough texture feeling, right? But for a much bigger, I'm saying, so if you want to say, is that the right word, extrapolated down, the numbers of threads per inch might have been similar to a small canvas like this one here. But it was such a rough canvas. Now, I'm holding my fingers up thinking about how rough was it. It wasn't as big as the ropes of my fingers. But fascinating stuff. But then later on, there's a show in which, if you can ever find the catalog for this, it's probably worth a look. It would have been brilliant for you to see this show, but it was called Like Breath on Glass. So if you're looking for a catalog, it was at the Clark Museum, the Francine and Sterling Clark Museum in Williamstown. And this picture is quite large also. I mean, it probably is at least 50 inches high as well. And has that, I've never seen a thicker weave than this canvas. I didn't even think to bring the Tiepolo to mind or to the screen for you all, but if you're in New York, have a look at that one, because I believe that's in that category too, but it's a huge canvas. I mean, it's very, very, what is it? I want to tell you I'll probably just make something up, but my sense of it is that it was somewhere in the neighborhood, at least 12 feet high or something like that. Some soldiers, horse maybe, I forget what all was in that painting, but really a delightful painting. One of the first paintings I've ever seen in which I just loved the way the paint moved, the way the painter was moving the paint. And you'll find that there's a certain physical contact when you have a textured surface that you can't get any other way, and some of us perhaps need that, but there's a certain quality of what we deliver through our muscles, I find, that has to be felt in the fingers. And but as I said, that doesn't mean anything smooth canvases. You can do that as well. If you're just noodling, that's not as big a deal if you're just in there smudging and tickling. But when you're trying to articulate long, continuous lines, as you see in Sargent and some of these other people. By the way, I don't have any comments about Sargent, but that whole world, typically they're on canvas, and typically they're in a range of texture um, that isn't imposing on the painting. And I'd leave that as kind of the bottom line. But frankly, my thoughts about this are find one that doesn't aggravate you, that provides most of what you really need to have happen with your paint, and then keep on studying painting, right? The mediums and methods, you try things from time to time. Keep on trying things from time to time. But watch out you don't lose. I had friends who've lost several years, shall we say, outside the classroom um, uh, because they're looking for the perfect brush or the perfect whatever, and get lost in the material side. And that's okay. I mean, that's maybe where their primary interest is. But yeah, but I doubt that it really ultimately is. It's just you can get lost there. So, all right. All right. Yeah, thank you for that question. And by the way, I hope Alan V, I hope I hope you're hearing this. You asked rather a somewhat similar question, so I should have stuck your question in there too, but I hadn't thought of it till now. All right, I think that's the last one I've got. All right, so yeah, enjoy painting. Try various surfaces, do different things, different times. Watch out how the paint works with different things, different kinds of brushes. It's going to require different things. The round brush I found really is the pleasing brush for this kind of, the heavier the canvas gets, the round brush is the one that, but I've laid in canvases with the Purdy's, like 1 inch, 1.5 inch house painting brushes. I like the angular ones for trimming, doing trim. I just find that your big old long brush, when you get that thick, your control isn't as great. Funny stuff. Just try brushes, try stuff. But the bigger you get, the more you rather need the ability to cover the canvas with efficiency. And house brushes, that's what they're made for. So that's me stealing from all the wonderful Isabeys and all those guys out there manufacturing brushes. Okay, all right. So let's revisit the live stream is going to be, I think it's the 5th of June. That's coming up. That's just a couple weeks out. And I'm sure Mr. Producer is posting it right there. And my intensive begins on the 20th of June. It's a 6-week intensive in which you can take any 2 weeks in it you like, if you would like to do something less, and or 4 weeks, frankly, you choose it. I just work with you where you are. So and we don't create a huge event. We don't have 40 people in there. So this is quite personal and easy to personalize. All right. So again, thank you, Benjamin, for your ongoing contributions, and for everybody who donates all through this period, getting us up to 300 videos. Would you believe? Thank you all for your patronage, so your subscriptions, sharing, and all those different ways. Thank you for your kind words all through this time as well. Really do appreciate it. And I hope it does you good as you explore the territory and try to improve your skills. All right. See you the next one.